There exists a moment in life when you see something that changes everything. It is not a big thing. It is not something the world expected. It is a simple thing that reveals a truth that you had not understood before. And on that day at Curry Camp in San Francisco, that moment was about to happen. Curry Camp has existed for 1 decade. Year after year, Steph Curry gathers young athletes to teach them, not just technique, mentality, discipline, the thing that makes champions. You can perceive when there is a place that is sacred, when there is a space that represents the transmission of knowledge, when there is an environment where legacy is shared with the world. And Curry Camp is this place. Steph is instructing. There are dozens of young athletes around him, some who will one day be in the NBA, some who will be in the WNBA, some who will be record holders in their own right. Steph is in the middle of them. Steph is demonstrating. Steph is teaching. And you can perceive when someone is doing what they were made to do. But there is a child in the corner. Canon Curry, 7 years old, son of Steph, a familiar presence at the camp. Canon is always here. Canon is part of the landscape. But in this moment, something changes. Canon is waiting. Canon is watching his father instruct. Canon has a basketball in his hands. He is not in a formal drill. He is not being instructed. Canon is simply present. And you can perceive when there is a shift in energy, when something subtle happens, when the dynamic changes imperceptibly. Canon picks up a second ball. Canon now has 2 basketballs. Canon is not looking to his father for instruction. Canon simply begins. And at that exact moment, something extraordinary happens that the entire world will come to recognize. Canon begins a dribble that is the signature dribble of Steph Curry. That dribble. The dribble that appears in warm-up videos. The dribble that represents absolute control. The dribble that is the athletic identity of Steph Curry. 2 balls. Both hands. Simultaneously. Crossovers between the balls. A movement that is technical. A movement that is beautiful. A movement that is unmistakable. And you can perceive when there is a quality in a movement that is different from a child trying to imitate. There is fluidity. There is naturalness. There is the quality of something that is not learned through instruction. There is the quality of something that is born. Canon is not speaking. Canon is not looking to anyone asking for approval. Canon is simply dribbling with 2 balls as if this were the natural way to exist. But there is a quality that is different. Canon is glancing at the camera. Canon is ensuring that people are watching. Canon is performing, but not like a child. Like an artist who understands what he has done. And you can perceive when there is an instinctive understanding in a child. When there is an intelligence that cannot be taught because it is beyond instruction. Canon's movements are clean. They are precise. They are extraordinary. And slowly, people begin to notice. First, it is an athlete nearby. Then it is another. Then it is a small group that stops doing drills to watch a child with 2 balls. Because there is something in Canon's movement that is hypnotic. There is something in the quality of the dribble that is undeniable. There is something that makes the world stop and watch. It is impossible not to notice when there is absolute competence in a 7-year-old child. When there is technique that should take years to develop, but is here, now, as natural as breathing. Crossover. Movement to the right. Movement to the left. Canon is moving across the court with 2 balls as if he had been doing this his entire life. As if this were the only way he knows how to exist. And you can perceive when there is a transmission that is biological. When there is something that cannot be taught because it is in the DNA. Steph, in the middle of instruction, perceives it. There is something on the periphery that calls for attention. Not because something is wrong, because something is extraordinarily right. Steph stops instructing the other athletes. Steph observes, and when Steph observes, there is a quality in that attention that is absolute. Because Steph Curry recognizes a movement that is his movement. Steph Curry recognizes a dribble that is his dribble. Steph Curry sees, for the first time with absolute clarity, his own son executing a movement that is the athletic essence of Steph. You can perceive when someone sees a reflection of himself, when he sees not just a son, but an echo of his own genius manifested in a small form. Canon continues. Canon does not know that his father is now observing with absolute attention. Canon is simply being Canon, a child who dribbles with two balls as if it were walking. And there is a specific moment when Steph understands something that will change his understanding of fatherhood forever. The moment when Steph perceives that this is not learning. This is not something a father taught to a son. This is something that a son was born knowing how to do. Do you know the difference between a child who learns a movement and a child who was born with a movement? The difference is invisible, but the difference is everything. Canon is not practicing the two-ball dribble. Canon is being the two-ball dribble. Canon is the living expression of something that is in his genes. It is in his DNA. It is in his biology. And you can perceive when someone has a revelation that is profound, when he understands that his child is not separate from him. The child is his continuity. The child is his living extension of himself at a level that transcends instruction. Athletes around continue watching. Cameras continue recording. The entire world will see this soon. A 7-year-old child dribbling with two balls like a champion. But for Steph, in this moment, there is something that is beyond basketball. There is something that is beyond technique. There is legacy being expressed live. Not the legacy of trophies, not the legacy of records, the legacy of DNA, the legacy of transmission, the legacy of genius that was passed from father to son without any formal instruction necessary. Canon makes a final movement. Canon stops. Canon looks at the camera with an expression that is cold, an expression that is absolute confidence. And you can perceive when there is an attitude that is innate, when there is a coldness that cannot be taught because it comes from a very deep place. Steph is observing, and in that moment, Steph understands a truth that is revolutionary. Canon did not learn this from Steph. Canon was born this way. Because you know when someone needs to leave to process what has happened, when it is necessary to be alone with a truth that has just been revealed. Steph leaves the camp. Steph walks. Steph moves away from everything that is familiar. And you can perceive when someone is processing something that will permanently change how he understands life. Because there is a difference between seeing and understanding. There is a difference between witnessing and processing. There is a difference between moment and meaning. Steph saw Canon do the two-ball dribble. But Steph is only beginning to understand what this means, because Steph has spent his entire life teaching the Warriors, teaching at Curry Camp, teaching his sons. You can perceive when someone is having a profound understanding about his own life, when he is seeing patterns that have always been there, but he had never truly understood. Steph never taught Canon this dribble. Steph never showed the movement to Canon in a deliberate way. Steph never said, "Canon, here is how you do this." Canon simply learned, but not through instruction. He learned through being nearby. He learned through observing. He learned through something that goes much deeper than instruction. Canon learned through DNA. And you can perceive when someone understands a truth that is fundamental about human nature. When he understands that we do not pass just knowledge to our children, we pass essence. Steph reflects on his own journey. Steph had a father who played basketball. Steph Curry was a player. Steph had a career. But Steph did not begin where Steph began. Steph had to learn differently. Steph had to work differently. Steph had to create paths that Steph had not created. Because Steph lived in a different era. Steph had access to things that Steph did not have. Steph needed to become something different than his father. Steph had to build genius. Steph had to work for mastery. And you can perceive when someone is having an understanding of a profound contrast, when he is seeing the difference between his own journey and the journey of his son. But Canon did not begin where Steph began. Canon began where Steph ended. Canon did not have to learn thy BB two-ball dribble. Canon was born knowing how to do it. Knowledge was in his gene. It was in his blood. It was in his body before his mind could even understand it. And there is a depth to this understanding that is disturbing. Because it means that Steph created not just a player. He created a lineage. You can perceive when someone understands the magnitude of his own impact. When he understands that he is not just an individual living a life, he is a link in a chain that goes far in both directions. Steph begins to think about what this means for the future. If Canon was born with a capacity that Steph took decades to master, this means that Canon will reach a level that Steph perhaps never will reach. It means that Canon will begin from a more advanced place and go further. This is not competition. This is not jealousy. This is simply a biological fact of how inheritance works. Each generation has the capacity to go further because it begins further than the previous generation. Because it takes the genius of the father and combines it with the opportunities of his time. You can perceive when someone has an understanding of human continuity, when he understands that an individual life is not an isolated point. It is part of a line that goes beyond himself. Steph reflects on the meaning of this truth. It means that when Steph is gone, Canon will be here, with Steph's DNA, with Steph's capacity, with Steph's essence in a new form. And it is impossible not to have a profound understanding of this. It is impossible not to understand that this is what it means to leave a legacy. Not a trophy that you win. Legacy is the continuity of you through the next generation. Legacy is that after you die, a part of you continues living in your children. Steph understands that the greatest thing he has done in life will not be the records he broke. It will not be the championships he won. It will be being a father to Canon. It will be the transmission of DNA that allowed Canon to be born already knowing something that Steph took years to learn. You can perceive when someone has a change of perspective that is radical. When he understands that the priorities he had are secondary to what truly matters. Steph returns to Curry Camp. But he is different now. Because Steph is not just teaching young athletes. Steph now understands that he is transmitting something that goes far beyond technique. Because he is transmitting essence. He is transmitting DNA. He is transmitting code that is more fundamental than any instruction he could give. You can perceive when someone has an understanding of the responsibility that accompanies fatherhood. When he understands that being a father is not about preparing a child, it is about recognizing that the child is already prepared, that the child already has the capacity at a level that the father had to work to achieve. And there is beauty in this understanding, and there is sadness also, because it means that the son will do things that the father never did. It means that the son will surpass the father not through training, but through the simple fact of birth. That is what it means to leave a legacy. It is not trying to make your son be like you. It is allowing your son to be an improved version of yourself. Steph observes Canon continuing to play. But Steph's observation is now different. It is not a father observing a son learn. It is a man observing the future that he has created. You can perceive when there is an understanding that changes everything. When someone perceives that their life does not end with them. When he understands that he is part of something that is much greater than himself. Steph understands in this moment that the success of his life will not be measured in championships or records. The success of Steph's life will be measured in Canon. It will be measured in the fact that Canon will exist with Steph's DNA, with Steph's capacity, with potential that goes beyond what Steph himself has. And you can perceive when someone has peace with this, when he understands that this is exactly how it should be, that this is the beauty of human nature, that our life is not about us, it is about continuity, it is about transmission, it is about being a link in a chain that connects the past to the future. Steph watches Canon glance at the camera again. Steph sees absolute confidence in his son's eyes, and Steph understands that this confidence is not something that Canon learned by watching Steph be confident. This confidence is in Canon because it is in Canon's genes, because it is in Canon's DNA, because Canon is the living expression of Steph's fatherhood. You can perceive when someone has a revelation that is transformative, when he understands that he is not the father who shaped the son. It is the code that was passed on that is expressing itself through the son. Steph never taught Canon to be confident. Canon is confident because he does not know how to be different. Confidence is in his biology, and this is what true inheritance means. It is not something that you teach. It is something that you transmit at the most fundamental level of existence. And you can perceive when someone understands this truth with crystal clarity. When Steph looks at Canon, Steph does not see a son who needs to be taught. Steph sees a living continuation of himself, who was already born knowing what took decades to learn. And there is freedom in this understanding. There is freedom in perceiving that fatherhood is not about trying to shape a child in your image. Fatherhood is about recognizing that the child is already your image, is already you in a new form. Steph has a final understanding in this moment. Canon will not be like Steph, because Steph will teach Canon to be like Steph. Canon will be like Steph because Canon is Steph, at the most fundamental level of the code that forms life. And this is an understanding that changes fatherhood forever. Because you know when someone recognizes himself in a mirror? When he sees not a reflection of the physical, but a reflection of the essence. Steph returns to Curry camp, but the return is different, because now Steph is not seeing a son. Steph is seeing himself. When Steph observes Canon do the two-ball dribble, Steph is not seeing a technical movement. Steph is seeing attitude. Steph is seeing mentality. Steph is seeing essence that is Steph Curry. Canon has confidence that is absolute. It is not learned confidence. It is not confidence that was taught. It is confidence that is in Canon's gene. That is in Canon's DNA. That is as innate as breathing. You can perceive when someone sees himself reflected in a child. When he recognizes not just physical similarities, but similarities of the soul. Canon glances at the camera while dribbling. There is performance in the gesture. There is an understanding that what you do is important. There is an awareness that the world deserves to see. And this is Steph. This is the essence of Steph Curry. It is an understanding that when you execute something extraordinary, you do not do it for yourself. You do it for the world. But while Steph took years to develop this understanding, Canon was born with it. You can perceive when someone understands a profound paradox, when he understands that the greatest success of his life is creating something that surpasses him. Steph is not jealous of Canon. Steph is not competing with Canon. Steph is seeing the future that he has created. Steph is seeing an improved version of himself in a small form. Because Canon has everything that Steph has. But Canon does not have the weight that Steph carried. Steph had to prove himself. Steph had to show. Steph had to convince the world that he was worthy. But Canon? Canon was born already proven. Because Steph has already proven it for both of them. You can perceive when there is an understanding of the privilege that comes with being the son of a great man. But there is also an understanding that privilege brings responsibility. Canon will not have to build a reputation from nothing like Steph had to do. Canon will begin with an already established reputation and will have to decide whether he will surpass it or be consumed by it. And there is a profound truth in this. There is an understanding that each generation faces different challenges. Steph reflects on his own journey. Steph had to be different from his father. Curry played basketball differently from Steph. Dell had a different career than Steph. Steph had no choice but to be different from his father. Steph had to create his own path. But Canon? Canon can be like Steph if he wants to. Because Steph's DNA is in Canon. Because Steph's capacity is in Canon. But Canon can also be different. Canon can also evolve. Canon can also surpass. You can perceive when someone understands that the greatest gift you can give your son is to be good enough that your son has the capacity to choose. If Steph were mediocre, Canon would be limited by this. Canon would inherit Steph's limitations. But because Steph was extraordinary, Canon inherited extraordinary capacity. And this gives Canon a freedom that few have. The freedom of not having to prove anything. The capacity is already there. So Canon can focus on being who Canon wants to be. Canon can choose. Steph watches Canon looking at the camera with confidence that is innate. And Steph sees himself. Steph sees the mentality that he developed. Steph sees the attitude that he conquered. And you can perceive when there is an understanding that is bittersweet. The bitterness comes from the fact that Steph will not be the sole bearer of this genius. Canon will have it too. The sweetness comes from the fact that Canon will have it too. Because Steph did not create genius for himself. He created genius to transmit. He created capacity to pass on. He created a legacy to continue. Steph spends his entire life working in an arena that is empty of Steph. When Steph is gone, the arena will be empty of Steph. But Canon? Canon will be here. With Steph's capacity. With Steph's DNA. With Steph's legacy. You can perceive when someone understands that the greatest impact does not come from yourself. It comes from what you leave behind. Steph also reflects on the differences between himself and Canon. Steph had to be introverted to get where he got. Steph had to be silent. Steph had to let the game speak. But Canon will not have to do this. Canon will be able to be extroverted. Canon will be able to perform. Canon will be able to glance at the camera and ensure that people are watching. Because Canon was already born proven. Canon does not need to be silent. Canon already has a voice because he has DNA that speaks louder than any word. You can perceive when someone understands that a son will be better than his father, not because he will work harder, but because he will begin further along. Steph began from zero. Canon began where Steph ended. This is not competition between father and son. It is continuity of lineage. It is the natural evolution of genius through generations, and there is peace in understanding this, because it means that Steph does not need to be afraid of being surpassed. Steph wants to be surpassed. Steph expects to be surpassed, because if Canon does not surpass Steph, it means that the transmission did not work. It means that the legacy was lost. But if Canon surpasses Steph, it means that everything worked perfectly. It means that DNA was transmitted correctly. It means that the lineage continues to evolve. You can perceive when there is an understanding that changes how someone wants to be remembered. Steph does not want to be remembered as the greatest player. Steph wants to be remembered as Canon's father, as a man who transmitted genius to the next generation. When future historians look at the legacy of Steph Curry, they will not focus only on the championships he won. They will focus on the fact that Steph Curry was part of a lineage that continued to evolve. Steph Curry was the link that connected the past to the future. You can perceive when someone has a radical change in how he measures success in life. Canon continues dribbling with 2 balls. Canon is being Canon, a child who is the living expression of genius that was transmitted. Steph watches, and there is a blend of feelings. There is sadness that Steph will not be unique. There is joy that Canon will be here after Steph is gone. There is gratitude that he managed to transmit something so profound. There is an understanding that this is exactly how it should be. Steph looks at Canon looking at the camera, and Steph understands a final truth. Canon is not a reflection of Steph, because Steph taught Canon to be a reflection. Canon is a reflection of Steph because Canon is the living continuation of the code that Steph carries. And this is what it truly means to leave a legacy. Not to leave a mark that remains static. To leave a mark that continues to evolve. To leave a mark that is alive. To leave a mark that breathes. To leave a son. Because you know when the moment comes to communicate a truth that has been understood. When internal silence transforms into voice. Steph approaches Canon. Canon finishes his movement. Canon is breathing. Canon looks at Steph with curiosity. And you can perceive when there is a connection between father and son that transcends words. When there is a profound understanding that does not need language to be communicated. Steph does not begin by talking about technique. Steph does not say, "You did well," or "You did poorly." Steph says something different, something that comes from a much deeper place. "Canon," says Steph. And there is a quality in his voice that is different from a father instructing a son. It is the voice of a man sharing a truth. Do you know what you just did? Canon, a 7-year-old child, shakes his head. Canon does not understand the magnitude of the question, but Steph continues. Do you know why you were able to do that in a way that most people in the world cannot do? Canon thinks. Canon has no answer. And you can perceive when someone is about to communicate a truth that will echo through another person's life. Because it is in you, says Steph, and there is weight in every word. It is not something that you learned. It is not something that I taught. It is something that you are. It is something that I am. It is something that will be in your children too one day. And you can perceive when a child begins to understand something that changes everything. What does this mean? Asks Canon simply. Steph breathes. Steph sits beside Canon. Steph is at the level of Canon's eyes. It means that you were born with something that most people spend their entire life trying to achieve. It means that you have code in you that is special. Code that comes from me. Code that comes from my father, code that goes to you, and that one day will go to your children. And you can perceive when there is a transmission of truth that is so profound that it transcends basketball. It transcends sport. It is about humanity. It is about how we continue to live through the next generations. Canon does not fully understand. Canon is too young, but Canon understands something. Canon understands that his father is saying something very important. So, "You are in it?" asks Canon, and Steph becomes emotional at the simplicity of the question. "Yes," says Steph, "I am in it, always will be, because you are my son, and you will be in your children, and they will be in your children, and this continues forever." You can perceive when there is an understanding of human continuity that changes everything. When a child understands that he is not isolated, that he is part of something that is much greater. Steph places his hand on Canon's shoulder. Steph speaks to the camera, to the entire world that is watching. This is legacy. It is not something that you can train in a gym. It is not something that you can teach in a classroom. It is something that you transmit through DNA. It is something that you pass on when you come into the world as a father or mother. You can perceive when someone is communicating a fundamental truth. When I see Canon do the two-ball dribble, my signature dribble, the movement that defines me, I am not seeing a son imitating his father. I am seeing legacy being expressed. I am seeing continuity. Steph breathes. Steph continues, "And this has changed how I understand fatherhood. This has changed how I understand success. This has changed how I understand what it means to leave a mark on the world." You can perceive when there is a transformation of perspective that is permanent. Because the trophies that I have won, the records that I have broken, the championships that I have conquered, one day they will disappear. One day, the world will forget how many points Steph Curry scored. The world will forget how many three-pointers. But Canon will be here, with my DNA, with my capacity, with code that comes from me. And Canon will create his own trophies, will break his own records, will win his own championships. And when Canon has children, Canon will pass this on too. And when Canon's children have children, it will be passed on too. And this is what it means to have a true legacy. You can perceive when there is a profound understanding being communicated with such clarity that it is inescapable. So it is not about me being better than my father. It is not about Canon being better than me. It is about a chain. It is about a lineage that continues to evolve. It is about humanity passing forward the most beautiful thing: capacity, DNA, essence. Steph looks at Canon again. Steph sees his son thinking about what his father said. One day you will be a father too. And your son will do something that you did, not teach. Your son will be born already knowing something that you took years to learn. And in that moment, you will understand what I am talking about now. You can perceive when there is a generational transmission of wisdom that is profound. And you will have peace, because you will understand that you are not losing anything. You are gaining everything. Because your son will continue what you started. Your son will be an improved version of you. Canon smiles. Canon does not fully understand. But Canon understands something important. "Can I continue playing?" asks Canon. And Steph laughs. He laughs because he understands that Canon is a child. Canon wants to play. Canon does not need depth at this moment. "Yes," says Steph. "Continue playing. But now you know that when you are playing, you are doing more than playing. You are expressing code that comes from generations. You are being alive. You are being continuity. Canon runs back to the camp. Canon goes back to playing with two balls. But there is a different quality now. Because Steph has changed how Canon sees himself. Steph continues observing. Steph has a peace that is profound. You can perceive when someone has understood a fundamental truth about life and death and continuity. When he understands that death is not the end. Death is transformation. Death is the passing of the torch. Hours later, videos of Canon doing the two-ball dribble begin to go viral again. The entire world is watching a 7-year-old child. But now there is a different context. Because Steph Curry has spoken. Because Steph has communicated what was really happening. And the entire world understands that it is not just a child performing the movement of his father. It is legacy being transmitted. It is DNA being expressed. It is the continuity of genius through generations. Comments on social media change. No more Canon is a talented child. Now it is Canon is a living representation of how legacy works. No more Canon will be like Steph. Now it is Canon will be a continuation of Steph. Canon will go beyond Steph. And you can perceive when there is a global change in understanding, when something that was seen in one way is completely reframed. Coaches of young athletes begin to use this moment as teaching. When your child has extraordinary capacity, it is not because you taught well. It is because you transmitted well. It is because you passed DNA well. Psychologists speak about generational transmission. Parents all around the world watch the video of Steph and Canon and have a different understanding of fatherhood. You can perceive when there is an impact that ripples through culture. When something that began as a personal moment between father and son becomes universal. Steph, years later, is asked what is his greatest success. And Steph does not speak about championships, does not speak about records. My greatest success was transmitting code to Canon, transmitting capacity that comes from generations, transmitting a legacy that will continue after I am gone. You can perceive when someone has completely redefined what success means. Because when I am old and when I am dying, I will not think about the points I made. I will think about Canon. I will think that Canon is here. I will think that my code continues to live through Canon. I will have peace that the lineage continues. Canon, years later, watches a clip of himself doing the two-ball dribble when he was 7 years old. Canon watches a video of Steph speaking about legacy and transmission and DNA, and Canon fully understands what his father was trying to say. Canon feels the weight of inheritance, feels the responsibility to continue, feels the honor of being a bearer of code that comes from generations. And Canon understands that this is not a weight that crushes. It is a privilege that liberates. Because Canon does not need to prove anything. The code is already there. So Canon can focus on being who Canon wants to be. Canon can evolve. Canon can surpass. And when Canon has children, Canon will pass this on too. You can perceive when there is a continuity that is beautiful. When there is a transmission that is sacred. When there is a legacy that echoes through generations. And this is what it truly means to leave a mark on the world. It is not a trophy that you win. It is not a record that you break. It is not a name that remains in history. It is a son who carries your DNA. It is a son who is the living expression of your code. It is a son who will be here when you are gone. And when your son's son is born, that new being will have your DNA too, will have your capacity too, will be a living continuation of you. And this continues forever. Through centuries, through generations, through time. And this is true legacy. Steph Curry understood this when he saw Canon do the two-ball dribble. And the entire world understood when Steph communicated this. And you understand this now too. Because you are part of a chain too. You are a link that connects the past to the future. You are a living transmission of code that comes from your parents. And when you have children, you will pass this on too. And the chain continues. Infinitely. Eternally. Before you judge someone's legacy, understand this. Understand that true legacy is not quantifiable. It is biological. It is DNA. It is transmission. This is what Steph Curry was trying to say when he looked at Canon and understood that fatherhood is not shaping a child. Fatherhood is recognizing that the child is already you, is already your code, is already your essence. And all you can do is help the child understand this and allow the child to move forward as an improved version of you.